All right, bibliography, a list of books or documents relevant to a particular subject or author. You know, I had a few requests for the bibliography from the previous study that I did, and so I'm going to list it here, as well as these same works were incremented in the study that we're about to get into as well. You know, and they are the Dead Sea Scrolls, translated, second edition by Martinez. The Dead Sea Scrolls Study Edition, second volume. Well, actually, it's a 2-volume by Martinez and Ebert and Chillar. And then we have the complete Dead Sea Scrolls in English by Vermes. We have the calendars in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Measuring Time by James C. Vanderkam. We have the Zodiac calendar in the Dead Sea Scrolls and their reception, Ancient Astronomy and Astrology in Early Judaism. Yes, I know that's a very long title for a book. We have the Three Temples by Rachel Elior. We have the role of the solar and lunar calendars in the redaction of the Psalms. We have the Songs of Sabbath Sacrifice, a critical edition by C. Newsom. We have the Library of Qumran by Harmut Stageman. We have the Book of Jubilees by R.H. Charles, translated by R.H. Charles, and the Book of Enoch, translated by R.H. Charles. And in case anyone was wondering where you can find a good copy of the Apocrypha, you can find one in the original KJV of 1611. Amen?
Amen.
All right. So, moving right ahead. Did you get it?
Yeah.
Okay. Moving right ahead. Today we're going to talk about the Creator's Calendar. Okay? And so, what we want to speak about is who, what, when, why, and where. What is it? What is Yah's calendar? It's Yah's system of timekeeping. And where is it? It's written on heavenly tablets and was shown to a man to copy as well as to pass on to the rest of humanity. When was it shown to the man? It was shown during the antediluvian era, that is before the flood. Who was the man it was originally shown to? That man was Enoch, the seventh from Adam. But it's also believed that it may have been shown to Moshe as well. And why was it given to humanity? And it's believed that Yah's earthly so that Yah's earthly priesthood and his heavenly priesthood could actually be in sync. You know, they believe that actually, you know, both were doing the same things at the same time, and they were in sync. And the question becomes now, how do we do it? Hallelujah. Hallelujah. So, the question now is how to do it. You know, and to be honest, I don't have it all figured out. You know, but I figure as we go along, we can figure it out together.
Hallelujah.
You know, so if there's any questions or concerns, I pray that you write them down, put them in the offering box, and we'll be sure to get to them as we go along. Amen?
Amen.
You know, so we're going to start from the beginning, and that is with New Year's Day. All right, so before we can really get off into a New Year's Day, we need to understand, scripturally speaking, what a year is. Because if we don't understand what a year is, then it doesn't matter if it's new or old. We won't know what it's talking about, right?
Yeah.
You know, so, and I know that everyone, you know, has an understanding of what a year is, you know, but we need the scriptural understanding of what a year is, right? Okay, so when we look up the word year, it's Shana or Shana, you know, and the first form being in plural only, the second being feminine. It comes from number 8138, which is Shana, and it means a year as a revolution of time, you know, and it also speaks to something that's long, you know, so we see that a year is a long revolution of time. Now, when we go back to its prime root, you know, which is Shana, number 8138, we see that it means to fold, that is duplicate, you know, literally or figuratively. You know, and it can speak to, you know, repeating something, returning and doing something a second time. You know, so hereby we learn that a year is a long revolution of time in which something is folded or duplicated, that is done again. All right, so this is the scriptural concept of a year. Amen? Amen. All right, so now we're going to take a look at the book of Enoch, because the book of Enoch, it actually speaks of something that happens in a year that is repeated or duplicated. So can I have my first reader read Enoch 72, 4 through 11, please?
First, there goes out the great light whose name is in the sun. Its roundness is as like the roundness of the sky, and it is totally filled with light and heat. 72:5. The chariot on which it ascends is driven by the blowing wind. The sun sets in the sky in the west and returns by the northeast in order to go to the east. It is guided so that it shall reach the eastern gate and shine in the face of the sky. 72:6. In this manner, it rises in the first month through the first gate. It proceeds through the gate, which is the fourth among the 6 openings, which are located in the direction of the east. 72:7. By this fourth gate, through which the sun rises, during the first month, there is 12 open windows, from which the flame flows when they are open at the appropriate time. 72:8. When the sun rises in the east in the sky, it goes out through the fourth gate of 40 mornings and descends faithfully through the fourth gate in the western sky. 72:9. During those 30 days, the daily becomes longer. The nightly shorter, for 30 days. 72:10. On that day, the day is longer than the night by the night. So the day turns out to be exactly 10 parts, and the night to be 8 parts. 72:11. The sun rises the fourth eastern gate, sets in the fourth western one, and it turns out and comes to the fourth gate, to the fifth gate of the east for 40 days, through which it rises and sets in the fifth gate.
Okay, so what we have here, so this is a description of the sun and the path in which it takes, you know, the cycle in which it makes. So we have in verse 4, it says, first there goes out the great light whose name is the sun. So it's no mistaking what we're talking about here. We're talking about the sun, right? You know, now it says in verse 6, it says, in this manner it rises in the first month through the major gate. You know, verse 7 tells us this major gate is the fourth gate through which the sun rises during the first month. Verse 8 told us when the sun rises in the east, in the sky, it goes out through this fourth gate for 30 mornings. Now, during this 30 mornings, verse 9 tells us that during these 30 mornings, these 30 days, the day daily becomes longer and the night becomes shorter. So the day is getting longer and longer and longer while the night is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Everybody still with me?
Yes.
All right. So Verse 10 told us it gets to the point that the day turns out to be exactly 10 parts and the night 8 parts, at some point. And then verse 11 said the sun rises from that 4th gate and sets in the 4th, and then it starts taking off through the 5th gate. So if you imagine, if you would, a gate like right here. Can everybody see my pointer? Gate like right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so it's saying, when it gets right about here to the 4th gate, this is the position that it will be in, during the first month. Now, if we had a clear view of the horizon, and say you were just looking out, over a plane, and you could just have a clear view of the horizon, you could actually watch the sun come up in these different gates. Now, it continues on in verses 12 through 19. My next reader, please.
At that time the day further becomes longer, and becomes 11 parts, and the night shortens and becomes 7 parts on account of the sun. It then returns to the east and comes into the 6th gate, rising and setting through that 6th gate for 31 days, according to the principle of the gate. On that day, the day becomes longer than the night still further, so the day becomes 12 parts, and the night shortens and becomes 6 parts. The sun is raised in such a way that its duration shortens and night occurs. The sun returns to the east and enters the 6th gate, rising and setting through it for 30 days. When 30 days are completed, the day decreases exactly by 1 part and becomes 11 parts, and the night 7. Then the sun, leaving the west by that 6th gate and going to the east, rises through the 5th gate for 30 mornings and sets again in the 5th gate in the west. On that day, the day decreases by 2 parts, so the day becomes 10 parts and the night 8 parts. Then the sun, departing from that 5th gate and setting in the 5th gate in the west, rises in the 4th gate for 31 days, according to the principle of the gate that sets in the west.
Hallelujah. Okay, so here it is. We see that it says in verse 14, it says, well, let's begin with 12. At 12 it says, at that time the day further becomes longer and becomes 11 parts, and the night shortens and becomes 7 parts. So you can see that the day is actually getting longer and longer, and the night is getting shorter and shorter, right? Okay, then it gets to a pinnacle or an apex, in verse 14. And verse 14 says, on that day the day becomes longer than the night still further, so that so the day becomes 12 parts, and the night shortens and becomes 6 parts. So the day is approximately twice as long as the night. Amen? Okay, now, what they call this today is the summer solstice. This is the longest day of the year. Okay, and where it started was, it started, we'll get into that. But this is the longest day of the year right here. So we see it started off where the day started to become longer and longer and longer. The night becomes shorter and shorter and shorter. And then you get to a point to where the day is approximately twice as long as the night, And then you're going to see something begin to happen. It says in verse 15, the sun is raised in such a way that its duration shortens, and the night occurs, and the sun returns to the east and enters into the 6th gate, rising and setting through it for 30 days. When the 30 days are completed, the day decreases exactly 1 part and becomes 11 parts, and the night 7. When the sun leaving the west by the 6th gate and going to the east, rising through the 5th gate for 30 mornings. And it says in verse 18, on that day, the day decreases by 2 parts. So what you're seeing here is now the day is decreasing. So it reached an apex, in which it was approximately twice as long as the night, and then it starts decreasing. Everybody still with me?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so verse 20 goes on to say, and on that day, the day is aligned with the night so that they become equal. So the night becomes 9 parts and the day 9 parts. So what we have, we started out, the day was growing longer than the night until it reached an apex to where it was approximately twice as long. Then it started reversing until it gets back to where it's equal, back to where it started from. You know, now this is the completion of the first half of the cycle that the Hebrew term Shana is referring to. We know this for a certainty, for it is the only long revolution of time, which is folded, repeated, duplicated, and done again. Now, verses 21 and 22 of Enoch 72 says, the sun departing from the gate and setting in the west returns to the east and comes out through the third gate for 30 days and sets in the third gate in the west. On that day, the night becomes longer than the day. It becomes longer than the previous night, and the day becomes shorter than the previous day for 30 days. So the night turns out to be exactly 10 parts, and the day to be 8 parts. You know, I threw that in there so you can see that the cycle is repeating. It has folded. You know, it is being duplicated. That is done again. Amen?
Yeah.
Now, we know now that we know what a year is, let's focus our attention on when it starts. So, when does the year start? When we look to Scripture, Deuteronomy 16:1 tells us, observe the month of Abib, and keep the Passover unto Yahuwah thy Elohim, for in the month of Abib, Yahuwah thy Elohim brought thee forth out of Mitzrayim by night. Exodus 12:2 teaches us, it says, this month, speaking of the month of Abib, shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. So from this, it becomes evident that the first month of the year is Abib. All right? Now, Abib, you know, literally means to green, and it means, it speaks to a young ear of grain, to sprout forth. You know, this is what Abib means. Now the Abib leads us to the equinox, because nothing can begin greening without the equinox first occurring. And the equinox is where Enoch begins the first month. That's where the days start to get longer and longer and longer, and the nights start to become shorter and shorter and shorter. And it's because of this excess daylight that things start to become green, that they start to sprout forth because of the extra light. All right? This is kind of what the cycle looks like that Enoch was describing. The vernal equinox, which is here, you know, starts the cycle. And as you see, the days are longer than the nights, and the days are lengthened. Then it gets to that apex, that pinnacle that Enoch spoke about, which I said was the summer solstice, i.e. the longest day of the year. Okay? Okay, and then after that apex, then you start seeing, you know, the days decreasing. So it says here, days longer than nights, but the nights are lengthening. You know, because now the days are decreasing, the nights are growing longer, until you get to the autumnal equinox, when they're equal. See, and this is where we was talking about, you know, okay, they're equal, this completes the first part of the cycle. Then the whole thing folds over, or is repeated or done again. Now the nights are longer than the days, and the nights are lengthening, until we get to the shortest day of the year. And during the shortest day of the year, the night is approximately twice as long as the day. Haven't you noticed in the wintertime, you know, it seems like, you know, it gets dark really, really fast? Because it gets dark really, really fast. You know, because the night is almost twice as long as the day. You know, and when it gets to where it's about equal, this is called the winter solstice. Okay? Now, from the winter solstice, the nights grow longer than the days, and the days begin to lengthen, and the cycle is repeated over again. Once it gets back to even, that's the end of the year and the beginning of a new year. So you see, that's the complete cycle, and that is the folding, or what is repeated. This cycle is repeated, twice in a year. In the first part of the cycle, the day gets longer, the nights get shorter, and in the second part, the nights get longer and the days get shorter. Everybody still with me? I haven't lost anyone? So this is the cycle in which Shana describes, what is repeated. And so there's 4 essential elements to a year. You have your vernal equinox, your autumnal equinox, and both of these speak to the times when there's approximately equal daylight and approximately equal nighttime. Then you have your summer solstice and your winter solstice. Your summer solstice speaks to the longest day of the year, and your winter solstice speaks to the shortest day of the year. All right? But it all begins with the equinox. So, that brings us to the question, what exactly is the vernal equinox? You have one that occurs in the spring, and you have one that occurs in the fall. Now, we know what the pattern is, and we know what to look out for the pattern, but there's something that starts the pattern, that begins the pattern, that sets it in motion. And this is the equinox. And the one that begins the year is the vernal equinox. There's 2, but the one that begins the year is the vernal equinox, which Scripture refers to as a bead. We know that because that's when stuff starts getting green. That's when the ear is in the corn. That's when things sprout forth. If we tried to start from the autumnal equinox, stuff would not be getting green. It would actually be getting brown, and it would begin dying. Stuff wouldn't be sprouting forth. It would be falling off the trees. Amen? It would be, stuff would be dying. So the vernal equinox speaks to incoming solar energy, coming from the sun when it is equal in both hemispheres, in the northern and southern hemisphere. Now, equinox is often, it literally means equal night. Speaking to equal, nox speaking to night. But as of late, there's become another term that has become popular. And this term is called the equilux. Now, the equilux is distinct from the equinox. The equilux speaks to it being, almost exactly 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night. Now, even though this does occur on the planet, it occurs on the planet at different times, for different places on the planet. In contrast, the equinox is the same on the planet everywhere at the same time. Now, the equinox is the day when the sun crosses the equator, thereby causing the change of seasons. It speaks to when the Earth passes a particular point in orbit around the sun. Contrary to its name, meaning equal night, it is not defined by the length of day or the length of night. It's defined by, the point in which it passes the equator. So that's important to understand because if not, you're going to be looking for, when it is exactly, the day is exactly 12 hours long and the night is 12 hours long. That is not the equinox. That is the equilux, and it is different all over the world. And there's a reason why it's different, but that's beyond the scope of this study. So it's not the equilux that we're looking for, which oftentimes occurs like 3 or 4 days earlier than the equinox. It's the equinox. Now, I want you to know that the equinox is not a new concept. This is something that they had known about since antiquity. It is something that the ancients was very familiar with. Now, this is the Earth during the equinox. The sun's rays, is shining upon the Earth, and the Earth's tilt is perpendicular to the angle of sunlight. This is the equinox. The Earth normally has a tilt to it. You know, it's not straight up and down. Its axis is not straight up and down. It actually has a tilt. But when that tilt is perpendicular to the sun's rays, this is the equinox. It happens twice a year. You know, on the equinox, sunrise and sunset are roughly 12 hours apart worldwide. Not exactly, roughly. You know, so that's important to understand. Otherwise, we get thrown off. Okay? And like I said, this is not something new. This has been around since antiquity, and I'm going to prove it to you. You know, Stonehenge, no one knows when it was built. You know, all we know is that it's very, 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 very old. You know, but it's evident that Stonehenge was a type of timekeeping, had some type of timekeeping mechanism built into it. You know, for it marks the equinox. When the equinox occurs, as you can see, the sun peers through the middle gate. You know, and this was built by ancient people a long time ago. And in all actuality, we can't duplicate this because we can't move any of these stones. Our strongest crane can't move one of these stones. You know, but for some reason, people look at the people of antiquity as if they were dumb or something. You know, they were not dumb by a long shot. You know, as we see, they have some things that we still can't replicate nowadays. Now, this is actually an old temple. It is the Mahajdra Lower Temple. And I believe it's in India, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, somewhere over there. But point being, it's a very old temple. It's one of the oldest structures on the planet. You know, it dates back to around 4000 BC. You know, and it was utilized to determine the time, the day of the equinox. And during the day of the equinox, as you can see, the sun peers through, it enters into the temple. You know, this is the doorway of the temple, and during the equinox, the sun enters into the temple. Also, this is another type of temple, and this was the Angkor Wat in Cambodia. It was originally a Hindu temple, and later became a Buddhist temple. But what we're interested in is the way it was built to determine the day of the equinox. It was built so that on the day of the equinox, the sun would crown the middle tower of the temple. You know, so I want you to know this is not something new. You know, this is something that was very well understood in times of antiquity. This is another spot of another ancient building in which they utilized to determine the equinox. You know, it is called the Grianan Aliach, and it's in Ireland. You know, it's part of a group of structures over there, and it creates on the day of the equinox like a 3-foot wide light that extends all the way across its field, you know, from one entrance all the way to the other. You know, and so again, these things were built precisely, you know, so that they could detect and determine the day of the equinox. This one is probably my favorite. It's just, you know, I mean, it's fascinating. It's a little wicked, but it's fascinating all the same. And this is of course a pyramid known as El Castillo. And in its staircase during the day of the equinox, as you can see, you know, there's a serpent that appears to slither down the side of the temple, and then they made a head at the bottom, so it appears on the day of the equinox that the serpent is slithering down the side of the temple. Them old people were dumb, right? Never mind, we can't replicate this, But point being, they knew about the equinox. This is not something that was foreign. This is not something new. So, I just wanted to put it out there because, some people, say, well, they didn't have no way of knowing that, when the equinox was way back when. That is not true. They absolutely did. And the proof of that is all over the world. So, these are some of the structures that is evident to that fact. Now the question is, how did the ancient Israelites determine the equinox? And, it is believed that it was through the star called Spica. Spica literally means ear of corn. It literally has the same meaning as a bead. And it's believed that, rather than looking for the barley to become ripe, they were actually looking for Spica. During the ancient times, Spica would arise in the east at the setting of the sun, and it would travel across the skies until it got to a particular point. When it got to that particular point, it was believed that the ear of corn was in the grain. And so that was a bead. And there was they had some help, in determining it. But first they had to find Spica, which was a part of the constellation of Virgo. Spica is like the 15th brightest star in the night sky. So it's easy to detect when you see it. Now, the way to find it, it's an old saying that says, "Arc to Arcturus and spike to Spica." And you start with Ursa Major, which we refer to as the Big Dipper. And so we find the Big Dipper, and then you find the handle of the Big Dipper. And you follow the handle of the Big Dipper to the next bright star, which would be Arcturus. And then you follow Arcturus onto the next bright star, which would be Spica. And this is how they found it. Now, also with this system, they would also look for Pleiades. Now, Pleiades is a cluster of stars. It's a small cluster of stars, and it was believed that before, well, it wasn't believed, it was actually factual, before the equinox, Pleiades would actually be sighted. Let's see, Pleiades told those that of antiquity that the equinox was coming when its appearance began to fade at the brightness of the dusk at sunset. And to find Pleiades, one would follow Orion's belt, stars up to the right, which points to another star called Aldebaran, and then they will follow that, keep the angle going until they reach Pleiades. So, this is the constellation of Orion. Orion means the warrior, and you can probably kind of see why, right? Now this is called Orion's belt. And so one will follow the belt up to Aldebaran, which would be this star, and then they will follow that up to the cluster of stars, and that's Pleiades. And when they would see that begin to fade at the dusk of sunset, then they knew that the equinox was imminent. But that wasn't it. they also could depend on, also could depend on Aldebaran. When the Aldebaran began to fade in at the sunset of dusk, sunset, fading to the brightness of the dusk at sunset, then they also knew that the equinox had passed. So they would use these two in conjunction with Spica to determine the precise day of the equinox. Now, unfortunately, we can't use the same system today because of something called the precession of the equinox, which speaks to how the skies move over the course of the time. So the night skies, within the age that we're in is different than it was back then. And so we can still look out and we can still see these stars during that time, but the timing of when they fade and being able to determine the exact day, is not as precise. But you will find them in the spring sky, around that time. All right, but there was another way that they determined, the equinox as well, and this was by the use of sundials. And the sundial is a very simple device that anyone can make, and there's even been some sundials of antiquity that was found to be pocket size, that folks was carrying around in their pockets, so that they can keep up with this, with the time, kind of like we carry watches and stuff today. Well, I don't even know. A lot of people not even wearing watches no more. They just carry their phones, But the sundial is another way, and you can make sundials as simple or as elaborate as you would like to make them. You can take a pencil and stick it in the middle of a pizza box and literally make a sundial. So maybe around the vernal equinox we'll get into doing some of that, so that we can have the experience if we so choose. Amen. Okay, so the sundial was yet another way to determine the equinox. All right, Yah's calendar. So now we know what a year is. We know when it starts. Let us consider its length in comparison to the Creator's calendar. Because they're not exactly the same. Enoch 75, verses 1 through 6. My next reader, please.
The leaders of the chiefs of the thousands, which are appointed over the whole creation, and upon all the stars, are counted together with the 4 leaders of the seasons. They do not leave from the fixed stations according to the reckoning of the year, and they render service on the 4 days which are not counted in the reckoning of the year. On this account, people err in them, for those luminaries scrupulously render service to the fixed positions of the cosmos. 1 in the first gate of heaven, 1 in the third, 1 in the fourth, 1 in the fifth, and 1 in the sixth. In this manner, the year is completed scrupulously in 364 fixed stations of the cosmos. Thus, the signs, the durations of time, the years, and the days were shown to me by the Malach Uriel, whom Yahuwah Almighty of eternal splendor has appointed over the luminaries of heaven, both in heaven and the world, in order that they, the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the created objects which circulate in all the chariots of heaven, should rule in the face of the sky, and be seen on the earth to be guides for the day and the night. Likewise, Uriel showed me 12 wide openings in the sky along the course of the chariots of the sun, from which the rays of the sun break out, and from which heat is diffused upon the earth, when they are opened during the designated seasons. That is when the 12 wide openings are opened in the sky, in the extreme ends of the earth, through which also the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the other heavenly objects come out in the west.
Okay, hallelujah. So in verse 2, we're told, in this manner the year is completed scrupulously in 364 fixed stations of the cosmos. Translation, there's 364 days in Yah's calendar. Verse 4, likewise Uriel showed me 12 wide openings in the sky along the course of the chariots of the sun. And verse 6 told us that that is when the 12 wide openings are opened in the sky. Translation, there's 12 months in a year. So what we're being told here is that there are 12 months in Yah's calendar, and that there are 364 days that make up those months. All right? Now, when we consider the solar year, which is from equinox to equinox, we get 365.25 days. Now, we're told that Yah's calendar is 364 days, right? You know, so this is approximately, so that leaves us 1.25 days left. Because we know that there's 365 days in a cycle from one vernal equinox to another vernal equinox, thereby leaving 1.24 to 1.25 days left over each year. After 7 years, there will be 8.68 days left over, and after a jubilee, there will be 60.75 days left over betwixt the two calendars. So, knowing that, Houston, we have a problem. You know, but don't fear, keep calm, to be continued. You know, so that's all I have for you today. Pray with a blessing.